Question 1. The audit findings indicate potential discrepancies in the inventory valuation process at Cleveland Cliffs. Which of the following represents the most appropriate initial response to these findings? Option A. Immediately implement revised inventory valuation procedures and communicate the changes to the relevant departments. Option B. Inform the external auditors of the potential discrepancies and await their guidance on how to proceed. Option C. Temporarily halt all inventory-related transactions until the discrepancies are fully resolved. Option D. Initiate a detailed investigation into the root cause of the discrepancies, involving relevant personnel and documentation review before proposing any corrective actions. Correct answer is A. Immediately implement revised inventory valuation procedures and communicate the changes to the relevant departments. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of how to respond to potential noncompliance identified during an internal audit at Cleveland Cliffs. The challenge lies in balancing the need for thorough investigation and remediation with the potential impact on ongoing operations and stakeholder confidence. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the response is both effective and compliant with relevant regulations and internal policies. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process of investigating the audit findings, assessing their root cause, and developing a corrective action plan. This approach is best professional practice because it demonstrates a commitment to compliance and continuous improvement, which are fundamental ethical and regulatory expectations for publicly traded companies like Cleveland Cliffs. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the requirements of regulatory bodies that oversee financial reporting and internal controls, such as the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, in the United States. A thorough investigation ensures that the identified issues are fully understood, preventing recurrence and mitigating potential risks. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate operational adjustments without a proper investigation fails to address the root cause of the problem. This could lead to recurring issues and a perception of superficial compliance, potentially violating internal control frameworks and regulatory expectations for robust risk management. Another incorrect approach that involves withholding information from relevant internal stakeholders or external auditors would be a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Such actions could be construed as an attempt to conceal noncompliance, leading to severe penalties, reputational damage, and a breach of trust with regulatory bodies and investors. A third incorrect approach that involves implementing a quick fix without proper documentation or validation risks creating new, unforeseen problems, or failing to adequately resolve the original issue, undermining the integrity of the audit process and internal controls. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes a structured, evidence-based response. This involves 1. Acknowledging and documenting the audit findings. 2. Initiating a formal investigation to determine the scope and root cause of any identified noncompliance. 3. Developing and implementing a comprehensive corrective action plan with clear timelines and assigned responsibilities. 4. Communicating findings and remediation plans to relevant stakeholders, including senior management and potentially the board of directors. 5. Verifying the effectiveness of corrective actions through follow-up reviews. This framework ensures accountability, transparency, and adherence to regulatory and ethical standards. Question 2. The audit findings indicate that a proposed operational change at Cleveland Cliffs mining facility may have significant implications for local water quality and air emissions. Which approach best addresses these findings in accordance with responsible corporate practices and regulatory expectations? Option A. Conduct a thorough environmental impact assessment to identify potential risks and develop mitigation strategies. Option B. Commission an environmental review from a consultant known for expediting approvals with minimal scrutiny. Option C. Rely on the informal opinions of experienced site managers regarding potential environmental effects. Option D. Proceed with the operational change, assuming existing environmental controls are sufficient. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough environmental impact assessment to identify potential risks and develop mitigation strategies. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term implications of environmental compliance and potential reputational damage for Cleveland-Cliffs. A hasty decision without proper impact assessment could lead to significant regulatory penalties, increased remediation costs, and erosion of public trust. The correct approach involves conducting a comprehensive environmental impact assessment. This process systematically identifies potential environmental consequences of proposed operational changes, evaluates their significance, and proposes mitigation measures. This aligns with the principles of responsible corporate citizenship and proactive risk management, which are implicitly expected under general business ethics and regulatory frameworks that aim to protect the environment. Specifically, in the U.S., the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, mandates such assessments for federal actions, and many state-level environmental regulations require similar analyses for significant projects, even for private entities like Cleveland-Cliffs, to ensure compliance with the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and other environmental statutes. This approach ensures that Cleveland-Cliffs operates within legal boundaries and minimizes its environmental footprint. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with operational changes without any environmental review. This demonstrates a disregard for environmental regulations and ethical responsibilities. Such an approach could lead to violations of the Clean Air Act or Clean Water Act, resulting in substantial fines, legal action, and mandatory operational shutdowns. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of a few long-term employees regarding environmental impact. This lacks the rigor and objectivity required for a proper assessment and fails to account for evolving regulatory standards or scientific understanding of environmental risks. This approach is ethically unsound as it prioritizes expediency over due diligence and could expose Cleveland-Cliffs to unforeseen liabilities. A third incorrect approach would be to outsource the assessment to a firm with a known history of overlooking environmental concerns. This is ethically compromised, as it suggests an intent to circumvent genuine assessment and could lead to falsified reports, exposing Cleveland-Cliffs to severe penalties and reputational damage if discovered. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes thorough due diligence, regulatory compliance, and ethical considerations. This involves 1. Identifying the core issue and potential risks. 2. Gathering relevant information and consulting applicable regulations and expert advice. 3. Evaluating potential courses of action based on their compliance, ethical implications, and long-term consequences. 4. Selecting the option that best balances operational needs with legal and ethical obligations, ensuring transparency and accountability throughout the process. Question 3. The performance metrics show a consistent decline in output efficiency at a key Cleveland-Cliffs processing facility over the last 2 quarters. Which of the following approaches is the most appropriate initial step to address this trend? Option A. Publicly assign blame to the shift supervisors for the observed decline in performance. Option B. Implement immediate across-the-board budget cuts for the affected department to force a reduction in operational costs. Option C. Assume the metrics are flawed and disregard them until further evidence emerges. Option D. Initiate a detailed review of operational procedures and identify potential bottlenecks or inefficiencies within the processing workflow. The correct answer is D. Initiate a detailed review of operational procedures and identify potential bottlenecks or inefficiencies within the processing workflow. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to interpret performance data within the context of Cleveland-Cliffs' operational goals and potential regulatory implications, without resorting to purely quantitative analysis. The difficulty lies in identifying the most appropriate qualitative approach to address the observed trends, considering the company's commitment to responsible operations and compliance. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that is both effective in addressing performance issues and aligned with ethical business practices and any applicable industry guidelines relevant to Cleveland-Cliffs operations. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of operational processes and potential contributing factors to the performance metrics. This is the best professional practice because it moves beyond simply acknowledging the data to understanding its root causes. Such an approach aligns with principles of continuous improvement and due diligence, which are implicitly expected of employees in a company like Cleveland-Cliffs. It demonstrates a commitment to identifying and rectifying issues proactively, which is crucial for maintaining operational efficiency, safety, and regulatory compliance. This aligns with general expectations of professional conduct in any industry, emphasizing problem-solving and accountability. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost-cutting measures without understanding the underlying performance issues would be professionally unacceptable. This fails to address the root causes and could lead to unintended negative consequences, such as reduced quality or increased safety risks, potentially violating operational standards or ethical considerations. Another incorrect approach that involves blaming specific individuals without a thorough investigation would be ethically unsound and unprofessional. It bypasses the necessary process of objective analysis and could foster a negative work environment, undermining team cohesion and trust. Furthermore, an approach that ignores the performance metrics altogether, assuming they are insignificant, would be a failure of professional responsibility and could lead to the escalation of problems, potentially impacting the company's reputation and financial health. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the context and objectives. This involves gathering all relevant information, analyzing performance data qualitatively to identify trends and potential causes, and then evaluating potential solutions based on their effectiveness, feasibility, and alignment with ethical and operational standards. The process should prioritize objective analysis, collaboration, and a commitment to finding sustainable solutions rather than quick fixes. Question 4. Investigation of a significant operational disruption at a key Cleveland Cliffs production facility has been initiated. The disruption is of unknown duration and potential financial impact. Which of the following approaches best addresses the immediate professional responsibilities and regulatory obligations of Cleveland Cliffs? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive internal assessment of the operational disruption's potential financial and operational impact. Consult with legal and investor relations departments, and then determine the appropriate disclosure strategy in accordance with SEC regulations and company policy. Option B. Advise key executives to refrain from any public statements while the situation is being assessed internally, with no formal communication planned until a definitive resolution is achieved. Option C. Inform major institutional investors directly about the operational disruption and its potential impact before any public announcement is made. Option D. Immediately issue a press release to all media outlets detailing the operational disruption and its potential, but unconfirmed, consequences to inform the public. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive internal assessment of the operational disruption's potential financial and operational impact, consult with legal and investor relations departments, and then determine the appropriate disclosure strategy in accordance with SEC regulations and company policy. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Cleveland Cliffs, as a publicly traded company, operates under strict regulatory scrutiny. Employees are expected to uphold the highest ethical standards and comply with all applicable laws and regulations, particularly concerning financial reporting and disclosure. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the need for accurate and timely information with the potential for misinterpretation or premature disclosure that could impact market perception and regulatory compliance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any communication, whether internal or external, adheres to established protocols and avoids creating undue speculation or misleading stakeholders. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of the potential impact of the identified operational issue on Cleveland Cliffs' financial performance and future outlook. This approach prioritizes gathering all relevant facts, consulting with appropriate internal departments, such as legal, finance, and investor relations, and then determining the necessity and timing of any disclosure in accordance with Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC regulations, and Cleveland Cliffs' own disclosure policies. This ensures that any public statements are accurate, complete, and made at the appropriate time, thereby protecting the company from regulatory penalties and maintaining investor confidence. This aligns with the SEC's requirements for timely and accurate disclosure of material information, as well as the ethical obligation to act with integrity. An incorrect approach would be to immediately communicate the issue to external stakeholders without a comprehensive internal review. This could lead to the dissemination of incomplete or potentially misleading information, which is a direct violation of SEC disclosure rules and could result in significant penalties for Cleveland Cliffs. Another incorrect approach would be to downplay or ignore the issue, hoping it resolves itself. This failure to acknowledge and address potential material impacts is a breach of fiduciary duty and regulatory requirements for transparency. Finally, an approach that involves selectively disclosing information to certain parties before others would constitute insider trading or selective disclosure, which are serious regulatory offenses. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework when encountering such situations. This framework typically involves 1. Identifying the issue and its potential scope. 2. Gathering all relevant facts and data. 3. Assessing the materiality of the issue, considering its potential impact on the company's financial condition, operations, and stock price. 4. Consulting with relevant internal experts and legal counsel. 5. Determining the appropriate disclosure strategy in line with regulatory requirements and company policy. 6. Executing the disclosure plan in a timely and transparent manner. Question 5. Strategic planning requires Cleveland-Cliffs to evaluate the potential impact of a new, large-scale operational efficiency initiative on its financial performance and market position. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with U.S. securities regulations and ethical disclosure practices? Option A. Prioritize the rapid implementation of the operational changes to realize benefits quickly, with a less detailed impact assessment. Option B. Delay the comprehensive impact assessment until after the operational changes have been fully implemented to capture actual results. Option C. Conduct a thorough, multifaceted impact assessment considering operational, financial, and market dynamics, and ensure disclosures reflect these findings accurately and transparently. Option D. Focus primarily on quantifying the immediate cost savings from the operational changes to highlight the efficiency gains. Correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough, multifaceted impact assessment considering operational, financial, and market dynamics, and ensure disclosures reflect these findings accurately and transparently. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Cleveland-Cliffs, as a publicly traded company, operates under strict regulatory oversight, particularly concerning its financial reporting and disclosure obligations. The need to balance strategic growth initiatives with accurate and timely reporting requires careful judgment to avoid misleading stakeholders or violating securities laws. The challenge lies in assessing the potential impact of a significant operational change on the company's financial health and future prospects, and then communicating this impact transparently and accurately. The correct approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that considers all relevant factors, including operational, financial, and market implications. This assessment must be grounded in established accounting principles and regulatory guidelines. By thoroughly evaluating the potential effects of the new operational strategy on Cleveland-Cliffs' financial statements, future earnings, and overall business viability, the company can ensure that its disclosures are accurate, complete, and not misleading. This aligns with the fundamental regulatory requirement to provide fair and transparent information to investors and the market, as mandated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, in the United States. Adhering to these principles protects investors and maintains market integrity. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the immediate cost savings of the new operational strategy fails to consider the broader implications. This could lead to an underestimation of potential risks or a misrepresentation of the true financial impact, potentially violating SEC rules against misleading statements. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes the speed of implementation over a thorough assessment risks, overlooking critical operational or financial challenges. This haste could result in inaccurate projections or disclosures, exposing Cleveland-Cliffs to regulatory scrutiny and investor distrust. Lastly, an approach that delays or omits the assessment of potential negative impacts, such as increased environmental compliance costs or market reception challenges, would be a direct violation of the duty to disclose material information accurately and promptly. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core objective of the strategic initiative. This should be followed by a systematic evaluation of all potential impacts, both positive and negative, using relevant data and expert input. The assessment should then be translated into clear, concise, and compliant disclosures, ensuring alignment with all applicable U.S. securities laws and accounting standards. This process emphasizes diligence, transparency, and adherence to regulatory requirements. Question 6. Governance review demonstrates potential environmental noncompliance issues at a Cleveland Cliffs facility. Which of the following approaches best addresses this situation in accordance with regulatory frameworks and ethical corporate responsibility? Option A. Temporarily halt operations at the affected facility until the issues are resolved, without a clear plan for assessment or remediation. Option B. Address the findings by implementing minor operational adjustments that appear to mitigate the immediate concerns, without a formal impact assessment. Option C. Prioritize cost-saving measures to offset potential future fines, while deferring a detailed investigation into the environmental impact. Option D. Initiate a comprehensive environmental impact assessment conducted by independent experts to fully understand the scope and nature of the noncompliance, followed by the development and implementation of a robust remediation plan. The correct answer is D. Initiate a comprehensive environmental impact assessment conducted by independent experts to fully understand the scope and nature of the noncompliance, followed by the development and implementation of a robust remediation plan. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's operational needs with its ethical and regulatory obligations concerning environmental impact. Cleveland Cliffs, as a major industrial entity, operates under stringent environmental regulations designed to protect public health and natural resources. A governance review highlighting potential noncompliance necessitates immediate and thorough action to mitigate risks and ensure adherence to legal frameworks. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the scope of the issue, determining the appropriate response, and implementing corrective measures without causing undue disruption to operations, while always prioritizing regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. The correct approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that meticulously evaluates the potential environmental consequences of the identified issues. This assessment should be conducted by qualified professionals and adhere strictly to the established regulatory framework governing environmental protection in the relevant jurisdiction. This approach is ethically sound and legally mandated because it ensures that Cleveland Cliffs understands the full extent of its environmental responsibilities and can develop targeted, effective mitigation strategies. It demonstrates a commitment to corporate social responsibility and proactive risk management, aligning with the principles of good governance and environmental stewardship expected of large corporations. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the findings of the governance review as minor or to delay a thorough assessment due to operational pressures. This failure to conduct a proper impact assessment would violate regulatory requirements, which often mandate prompt investigation and reporting of potential environmental noncompliance. Ethically, it represents a disregard for environmental protection and a potential risk to public health and ecosystems. Another incorrect approach would be to implement superficial or cosmetic changes without a deep understanding of the root causes or the actual environmental impact. This superficial response fails to address the core issues, leaving Cleveland Cliffs vulnerable to continued noncompliance, potential fines, and reputational damage. It also undermines the integrity of the governance review process and demonstrates a lack of genuine commitment to environmental responsibility. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on cost-saving measures without adequately considering the environmental implications would be professionally unsound. While financial prudence is important, it cannot supersede legal and ethical obligations to protect the environment. Such an approach risks significant legal penalties, reputational harm, and long-term environmental damage, ultimately proving more costly than a proactive, compliant strategy. Professionals in such situations should adopt a structured decision-making process. This begins with acknowledging the seriousness of the governance review findings. Next, they must identify the specific regulatory framework applicable to Cleveland Cliffs operations and the potential environmental issues. The core of the process involves initiating a detailed impact assessment, engaging appropriate expertise, and ensuring all steps are documented. Communication with relevant regulatory bodies, if required by law, should be timely and transparent. The ultimate goal is to achieve compliance, minimize environmental harm, and uphold the company's ethical standing. Question 7. When evaluating potential process optimization initiatives at Cleveland Cliffs to enhance operational efficiency and reduce costs, which of the following approaches best aligns with the company's obligations under U.S. regulatory frameworks and ethical business practices? Option A. Prioritize implementing changes that offer the most immediate cost savings, even if they require bypassing some standard operational checks and balances, with the intention of addressing compliance later. Option B. Focus exclusively on technological solutions that promise significant automation, without a detailed assessment of how these new technologies integrate with existing compliance systems and employee training requirements. Option C. Implement changes based on the recommendations of a single department that has identified a perceived inefficiency, without broader consultation or validation of the proposed solution's impact. Option D. Conduct a thorough analysis of existing workflows, identify key performance indicators, solicit input from operational and compliance teams, and propose data-driven improvements that are rigorously tested for their impact on efficiency, safety, and regulatory adherence. The correct answer is A. Prioritize implementing changes that offer the most immediate cost savings, even if they require bypassing some standard operational checks and balances, with the intention of addressing compliance later. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Cleveland-Cliffs, as a publicly traded company, operates under stringent regulatory oversight, particularly concerning its financial reporting and operational efficiency. Decisions regarding process optimization must align with the company's fiduciary duties to shareholders and adhere to the principles of good corporate governance. The pressure to demonstrate continuous improvement and cost savings can sometimes lead to overlooking critical compliance or ethical considerations. Therefore, a balanced approach that prioritizes both efficiency and regulatory adherence is paramount. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of existing operational workflows, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies through data analysis and stakeholder input, and then proposing targeted improvements that are evaluated for their impact on safety, environmental compliance, and financial performance. This method is justified by the regulatory framework governing publicly traded companies, which mandates accurate financial reporting and responsible operational management. Specifically, adherence to regulations like the Sarbanes-Oxley Act (SOX) in the United States, which requires robust internal controls over financial reporting, necessitates that any process changes are well documented, tested, and do not introduce new risks to financial accuracy or operational integrity. Furthermore, ethical considerations demand that improvements do not compromise employee safety or environmental stewardship, which are also subject to regulatory scrutiny. An approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory compliance risks is incorrect. This could lead to violations of environmental regulations, safety standards, or financial reporting requirements, resulting in significant fines, reputational damage, and legal liabilities for Cleveland-Cliffs. For instance, implementing a new process that bypasses required environmental monitoring steps, even if it saves money, would be a direct violation of environmental protection laws. Another incorrect approach is to implement changes based on anecdotal evidence or without proper validation. This lacks the rigor required by regulatory bodies and can lead to unintended negative consequences. For example, a process change that appears to speed up production, but inadvertently increases the risk of equipment malfunction or product defects could lead to safety incidents or quality control failures, both of which have regulatory implications. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough risk assessment is also flawed. Regulatory frameworks often require a period of testing and validation for significant process changes, especially those impacting financial data or safety protocols. Rushing implementation without this due diligence can result in errors, noncompliance, and the need for costly rework, undermining the very goals of process optimization. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured framework. 1. Define the objective clearly, ensuring it aligns with both business goals and regulatory requirements. 2. Gather comprehensive data and involve relevant stakeholders, including compliance officers and safety personnel. 3. Conduct a thorough risk assessment, identifying potential regulatory, financial, safety, and environmental impacts of proposed changes. 4. Develop and evaluate multiple optimization strategies, prioritizing those with a clear benefit-cost analysis that includes compliance costs and risk mitigation. 5. Implement changes in a phased manner with rigorous testing and monitoring. 6. Continuously review and adapt processes to ensure ongoing compliance and efficiency. Question 8. Market research demonstrates that Cleveland-Cliffs' current ore processing methods are experiencing a decline in efficiency. To address this, a proposal suggests implementing a new, faster processing technology. However, the implementation timeline is aggressive and may require temporary adjustments to how certain operational costs are classified to meet the project's initial budget targets, which approach best balances process optimization with regulatory compliance for Cleveland-Cliffs. Option A. Expedite the implementation by reclassifying initial setup costs as capital expenditures, even if their immediate operational benefit is uncertain, to present a more favorable initial financial picture. Option B. Implement the new technology, classifying all associated initial setup costs as operational expenses to accurately reflect the immediate impact on the company's financial statements, and conduct a post-implementation review to refine cost allocation. Option C. Delay the implementation of the new technology until a comprehensive review of all potential accounting treatments and regulatory implications can be completed, ensuring absolute adherence to all disclosure requirements. Option D. Implement the new technology, but defer the formal classification of initial setup costs until the end of the fiscal year, allowing for a more flexible allocation based on year-end performance. The correct answer is B. Implement the new technology, classifying all associated initial setup costs as operational expenses to accurately reflect the immediate impact on the company's financial statements, and conduct a post-implementation review to refine cost allocation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Cleveland-Cliffs, as a publicly traded company, operates under strict regulatory oversight, particularly concerning its financial reporting and operational disclosures. The need to optimize processes while maintaining compliance requires a nuanced understanding of how operational improvements can impact financial statements and investor confidence. Careful judgment is required to balance the pursuit of efficiency with the imperative of accurate and transparent reporting, avoiding any actions that could be construed as misleading or manipulative. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes, identifying inefficiencies, and proposing improvements that are demonstrably beneficial to Cleveland-Cliffs' operations and financial health. This includes ensuring that any proposed changes are documented, justified by sound business rationale, and that their implementation does not necessitate any misrepresentation of the company's financial position or operational performance. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the regulatory framework governing public companies, which mandates truthful and complete disclosure. Specifically, adherence to accounting standards and securities regulations ensures that stakeholders receive accurate information, fostering trust and enabling informed investment decisions. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering the impact on reporting accuracy would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to the manipulation of financial results, such as capitalizing operational expenses that should be expensed or prematurely recognizing revenue, which violates accounting principles and securities laws. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thoroughness and validation risks introducing errors or overlooking critical compliance issues. This could result in inaccurate disclosures, potentially leading to regulatory penalties and reputational damage for Cleveland-Cliffs. A third incorrect approach that involves making assumptions about process improvements without consulting relevant stakeholders or seeking necessary approvals bypasses essential internal controls and governance procedures, increasing the risk of non-compliance and operational disruption. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the objectives, followed by a comprehensive assessment of potential impacts, including regulatory and ethical considerations. This involves consulting relevant policies, seeking expert advice when necessary, and ensuring that all proposed actions are transparent, justifiable, and aligned with the company's commitment to integrity and compliance. Question 9. Analysis of a proposed process optimization at Cleveland-Cliffs that aims to significantly reduce waste byproducts. The proposal suggests altering a key chemical reaction step. What is the most professionally responsible approach to evaluating this optimization, considering the company's commitment to U.S. environmental regulations and operational safety? Option A. Prioritize the speed of implementation to gain a competitive advantage, deferring a detailed regulatory impact assessment until after the process has been modified. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of all applicable U.S. environmental regulations, e.g., EPA standards, and OSHA safety guidelines to ensure the proposed alteration does not introduce any new compliance risks or violate existing mandates, and consult with internal compliance and legal teams before implementation. Option C. Rely on general industry best practices for waste reduction and assume that the proposed chemical reaction change aligns with typical environmental standards without specific verification against U.S. regulations. Option D. Implement the proposed alteration immediately to realize cost savings from waste reduction, assuming that any new byproducts will be managed through standard disposal procedures. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of all applicable U.S. environmental regulations, e.g., EPA standards, and OSHA safety guidelines to ensure the proposed alteration does not introduce any new compliance risks or violate existing mandates, and consult with internal compliance and legal teams before implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Cleveland-Cliffs employee tasked with optimizing a process. The challenge lies in balancing the pursuit of efficiency gains with the imperative to adhere strictly to established regulatory frameworks and internal company guidelines, particularly those relevant to environmental compliance and operational safety. A failure to do so could result in significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and harm to employees or the environment. The correct approach involves a systematic evaluation of potential process improvements that demonstrably align with and enhance compliance with all applicable U.S. environmental regulations, such as the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act, as well as OSHA safety standards. This approach prioritizes understanding the existing regulatory landscape and ensuring any proposed changes do not inadvertently create new compliance risks or violate existing mandates. It requires proactive engagement with compliance officers and legal counsel to validate proposed optimizations against the strict letter of the law and company policy. This ensures that efficiency is achieved ethically and legally, safeguarding Cleveland-Cliffs from regulatory enforcement actions and maintaining its commitment to responsible operations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without a thorough regulatory impact assessment is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the legal and ethical obligations Cleveland-Cliffs has to operate within environmental and safety regulations. Such an approach risks introducing noncompliance, leading to fines, operational shutdowns, and potential criminal liability. Another incorrect approach, which involves implementing changes based on anecdotal evidence or industry best practices without verifying their specific applicability and compliance within the Cleveland-Cliffs operational context and U.S. regulatory framework, is also flawed. This overlooks the unique regulatory requirements and operational nuances that must be addressed, potentially leading to unintended consequences and noncompliance. A third incorrect approach, prioritizing speed of implementation over thorough due diligence and regulatory review, demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility. This haste can lead to overlooking critical compliance issues, thereby exposing the company to significant risks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the current regulatory environment and internal policies. Any proposed process optimization must then be rigorously assessed for its impact on compliance with these mandates. This involves consulting with relevant subject matter experts, including legal and compliance departments, to ensure all potential risks are identified and mitigated. The decision should be based on a clear demonstration that the proposed changes not only improve efficiency, but also maintain or enhance regulatory compliance and operational safety. Question 10. Benchmark analysis indicates that Cleveland-Cliffs is exploring several process optimization strategies to enhance operational efficiency. Which of the following approaches best ensures that these initiatives comply with U.S. federal securities laws and SEC disclosure requirements? Option A. Implement optimization changes that are projected to yield significant cost savings and only disclose the positive financial outcomes to investors. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of proposed process optimization changes with Cleveland-Cliffs legal and compliance departments to assess their materiality and disclosure obligations under U.S. federal securities laws. Option C. Prioritize implementing the most cost-effective optimization strategies immediately and address any disclosure implications retrospectively. Option D. Focus solely on internal operational metrics to measure the success of optimization efforts, assuming external reporting will naturally reflect these improvements. The correct answer is C. Prioritize implementing the most cost-effective optimization strategies immediately and address any disclosure implications retrospectively. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Cleveland-Cliffs, as a publicly traded company, is subject to stringent regulatory oversight regarding its financial reporting and operational disclosures, ensuring that process optimization initiatives are not only efficient, but also compliant with all applicable U.S. securities laws and regulations is paramount. The challenge lies in balancing the drive for operational improvement with the absolute necessity of accurate and transparent reporting to investors and regulatory bodies like the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. Misrepresenting the impact of these initiatives, even with good intentions, can lead to severe legal and reputational consequences. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the proposed process optimization changes by Cleveland-Cliffs legal and compliance departments to ensure alignment with SEC disclosure requirements, particularly those related to material events and financial reporting. This proactive engagement guarantees that any changes impacting operational efficiency, cost structures, or future earnings are properly assessed for their disclosure obligations under U.S. federal securities laws. This aligns with the SEC's emphasis on timely and accurate disclosure of information that could influence an investor's decision. An incorrect approach would be to implement process changes without consulting legal and compliance, assuming that operational improvements are inherently positive and do not require specific disclosure. This fails to acknowledge that the impact and reporting of such changes are subject to regulation. Another incorrect approach would be to selectively disclose only the positive outcomes of process optimization, omitting any potential negative impacts or challenges encountered during implementation. This violates the principle of full and fair disclosure mandated by U.S. securities laws. Finally, relying solely on internal operational metrics without considering their potential materiality for external reporting also represents a failure to adhere to regulatory expectations. Professionals at Cleveland-Cliffs should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance from the outset of any process optimization project. This involves integrating legal and compliance teams into the planning and execution phases, conducting regular risk assessments for disclosure implications, and establishing clear communication channels to ensure all material information is identified and appropriately reported according to U.S. securities regulations. Question 11. Process analysis reveals a potential opportunity for significant cost reduction in Cleveland-Cliffs iron ore processing operations through a modification that could alter wastewater discharge characteristics. What is the most appropriate initial step to ensure compliance with environmental regulations? Option A. Inform the relevant environmental regulatory agency of the potential change and await their guidance before proceeding, even if it delays cost savings. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed modifications' impact on all relevant environmental permits and regulations, consulting with environmental compliance specialists and legal counsel if necessary, before any implementation. Option C. Assume that minor changes in wastewater characteristics will fall within existing permit allowances and proceed with the modification without further investigation. Option D. Implement the process modification immediately to capture cost savings and address any potential regulatory issues retrospectively. The correct answer is D. Implement the process modification immediately to capture cost savings and address any potential regulatory issues retrospectively. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Cleveland-Cliffs, as a publicly traded company, operates under stringent regulatory oversight, particularly concerning environmental compliance and public reporting. The pressure to achieve cost savings through process optimization must be balanced against the absolute requirement to adhere to environmental regulations and maintain accurate disclosures to stakeholders. Misinterpreting or circumventing these regulations can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of investor confidence. The correct approach involves a thorough review of all proposed process changes against current environmental regulations and internal compliance policies. This includes assessing potential impacts on emissions, waste generation, and resource consumption. If a proposed optimization requires a deviation from established environmental standards or permits, the appropriate regulatory bodies must be consulted, and necessary approvals obtained before implementation. This proactive and compliant approach ensures that cost savings are achieved ethically and legally, safeguarding Cleveland-Cliffs from regulatory action and maintaining its commitment to environmental stewardship. This aligns with the principles of responsible corporate conduct and regulatory compliance expected of companies in the mining and steel industries. An incorrect approach that prioritizes cost savings without verifying regulatory compliance is professionally unacceptable. This could involve implementing process changes that inadvertently increase emissions beyond permitted levels or generate hazardous waste without proper disposal protocols. Such actions would violate environmental laws and regulations, potentially leading to fines, operational shutdowns, and criminal charges. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with optimizations that might require new permits or modifications to existing ones, but to delay or omit the application process. This demonstrates a disregard for the regulatory framework and can be interpreted as an attempt to operate outside of legal requirements. The consequences include retroactive penalties and mandated remediation efforts, which can be far more costly than proactive compliance. Finally, an approach that involves making assumptions about regulatory requirements without consulting official documentation or legal counsel is also flawed. Regulatory landscapes are complex and subject to change. Relying on outdated information or personal interpretations can lead to unintentional noncompliance. Professionals must engage in due diligence, seeking expert advice when necessary to ensure all actions are fully compliant. The professional decision-making process in such situations requires a systematic evaluation of proposed changes, a clear understanding of applicable regulations, consultation with environmental and legal experts, and a commitment to transparency in all dealings with regulatory bodies. Question 12. Research into process optimization at Cleveland-Cliffs has identified a potential method to significantly reduce water usage in a specific manufacturing step. However, this method involves altering the chemical composition of the wastewater discharged. What is the most appropriate initial step for a Cleveland-Cliffs employee to take to ensure this optimization adheres to all relevant U.S. environmental regulations? Option A. Proceed with the optimization based on the assumption that existing permits will cover the altered wastewater composition. Option B. Assume that any reduction in water usage is inherently environmentally beneficial and therefore compliant with all regulations. Option C. Implement the new process immediately to realize cost savings and then address any potential regulatory issues that arise. Option D. Consult with the Environmental Compliance Department and review all applicable U.S. federal and state environmental permits and regulations pertaining to wastewater discharge before implementing any changes. The correct answer is C. Implement the new process immediately to realize cost savings and then address any potential regulatory issues that arise. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Cleveland-Cliffs employee tasked with optimizing a process. The challenge lies in balancing the pursuit of efficiency gains with the absolute requirement to adhere to all applicable U.S. federal and state environmental regulations. Failure to do so can result in significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and harm to the environment. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed process optimization does not inadvertently lead to noncompliance. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing environmental permits and regulations relevant to the specific process being optimized. This includes understanding discharge limits, waste disposal requirements, and reporting obligations under laws such as the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. Any proposed changes must be evaluated against these requirements before implementation. This proactive, compliance-first strategy is essential for maintaining operational integrity and avoiding legal repercussions. It aligns with the ethical duty of professionals to act with due care and to uphold the law. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize cost savings or increased output without first verifying regulatory compliance. For instance, modifying a process to reduce waste generation without confirming that the new waste stream is permissible under current regulations or that new disposal methods are compliant represents a significant regulatory failure. Similarly, Implementing changes that could increase emissions without obtaining necessary permits or conducting required monitoring would violate environmental laws. Another failure would be to assume that a process is compliant simply because it has been operating for a long time, without reevaluating it in light of potential regulatory updates or changes in operational parameters. These approaches demonstrate a disregard for legal obligations and ethical responsibilities. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the regulatory landscape. Before proposing or implementing any process change, they must identify all relevant laws, regulations, and permit conditions. This should be followed by a risk assessment, evaluating how the proposed change might impact compliance. If potential issues arise, consultation with environmental compliance specialists or legal counsel is paramount. The decision to proceed should only be made after confirming that the optimized process meets or exceeds all regulatory requirements. Question 13. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing advanced emission control technology at a Cleveland Cliffs manufacturing facility would significantly increase operational expenses in the short term, but deferring these upgrades would result in substantial long-term environmental remediation costs and potential regulatory fines. Considering the company's commitment to responsible environmental stewardship and adherence to U.S. federal environmental laws, which course of action best aligns with professional and ethical obligations? Option A. Seek to interpret existing U.S. environmental regulations in a manner that allows for the deferral of the emission control technology, arguing that current emissions are within acceptable historical operational parameters. Option B. Defer the implementation of the advanced emission control technology to maximize short-term cost savings, relying on the company's historical compliance record to negotiate potential future penalties. Option C. Investigate alternative, less costly emission reduction methods that may not fully meet the most stringent U.S. environmental standards, but offer a compromise between cost and environmental impact. Option D. Prioritize immediate implementation of the advanced emission control technology to ensure full compliance with all applicable U.S. environmental regulations and mitigate future risks. The correct answer is D. Prioritize immediate implementation of the advanced emission control technology to ensure full compliance with all applicable U.S. environmental regulations and mitigate future risks. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Cleveland Cliffs, as a publicly traded company, must navigate the complex interplay between potential cost savings and its legal and ethical obligations to stakeholders, particularly in the context of environmental compliance. The decision involves balancing financial prudence with the imperative to adhere to stringent environmental regulations, which are designed to protect public health and the environment. A hasty decision based solely on immediate cost reduction could lead to significant long-term liabilities, reputational damage, and regulatory penalties. The correct approach involves prioritizing compliance with all applicable environmental regulations, even if it incurs higher upfront costs. This aligns with the fundamental principle of corporate responsibility and the legal mandate to operate within established environmental frameworks. Specifically, under U.S. federal environmental law, such as the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act, companies are required to meet specific emission and discharge standards. Failure to do so can result in substantial fines, injunctions, and even criminal prosecution. Furthermore, ethical considerations demand that Cleveland Cliffs act as a responsible corporate citizen, safeguarding the environment for current and future generations. This proactive stance on compliance fosters trust with regulators, communities, and investors, ultimately contributing to long-term sustainability and value. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the immediate cost savings of deferring necessary upgrades would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for regulatory requirements, potentially violating statutes like the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act (RCRA) or the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act (CERCLA) if hazardous waste is involved. Such an approach also represents an ethical lapse, prioritizing short-term financial gain over environmental stewardship and public well-being. Another incorrect approach, which involves seeking loopholes or misinterpreting regulations to avoid compliance, is also professionally unsound. This demonstrates a lack of integrity and can lead to severe legal repercussions when discovered by regulatory bodies like the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. Professionals at Cleveland-Cliffs should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of all relevant environmental regulations. This should be followed by a comprehensive assessment of the costs and benefits associated with various compliance strategies, including the long-term implications of noncompliance. The decision must then be made in alignment with legal requirements and ethical principles, ensuring that environmental protection is a core consideration, not an afterthought. This systematic approach, often involving consultation with legal and environmental experts, safeguards the company from legal and reputational risks while upholding its commitment to responsible operations. Question 14. Comparative studies suggest that employees in publicly traded companies often face situations where personal financial interest might intersect with their professional responsibilities. For an employee at Cleveland-Cliffs who is involved in the procurement process and has recently made a personal investment in a company that is a potential supplier to Cleveland-Cliffs, what is the most appropriate course of action to uphold ethical standards and regulatory compliance? Option A. Resign from Cleveland-Cliffs immediately without informing anyone about the investment or the procurement situation. Option B. Proceed with the procurement decision as usual, assuming their professional judgment will not be compromised by the personal investment. Option C. Secretly attempt to steer the procurement process in favor of the supplier in which they have invested. Option D. Disclose the personal investment to their direct manager or the Cleveland-Cliffs Compliance Department, and follow company procedures for managing potential conflicts of interest. The correct answer is D. Disclose the personal investment to their direct manager or the Cleveland-Cliffs Compliance Department, and follow company procedures for managing potential conflicts of interest. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Cleveland-Cliffs, a publicly traded company, due to the potential for conflicts of interest and the need to uphold the company's ethical standards and regulatory compliance. The employee's personal investment in a supplier could influence their judgment in procurement decisions, potentially leading to unfair advantages for the supplier or disadvantage for Cleveland-Cliffs. Navigating this requires careful consideration of company policy, ethical obligations, and potential regulatory implications under U.S. securities laws and corporate governance guidelines. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves proactively disclosing the personal investment to the appropriate internal authority at Cleveland-Cliffs, such as their manager or the compliance department. This aligns with the principles of transparency and good corporate governance, which are paramount in publicly traded companies operating under U.S. regulations. Disclosure allows the company to assess the situation, implement appropriate safeguards, e.g., recusal from relevant decisions, and ensure that procurement processes remain fair and unbiased. This proactive step demonstrates integrity and adherence to ethical codes of conduct, minimizing the risk of actual or perceived conflicts of interest and potential violations of securities laws related to insider trading or disclosure requirements. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to take no action and proceed with the procurement decision as usual. This fails to address the conflict of interest, potentially leading to decisions that are not in the best interest of Cleveland-Cliffs. Ethically, it is a breach of trust and could be viewed as self-dealing. From a regulatory standpoint, if the decision is influenced by the personal investment, it could lead to violations of anti-fraud provisions under U.S. securities laws and breach fiduciary duties owed to the company and its shareholders. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to conceal the personal investment. This is a serious ethical and regulatory violation. Concealment suggests intent to mislead and exploit the situation for personal gain. It directly contravenes the principles of honesty and integrity expected of employees, especially in a regulated environment like the U.S. financial markets. Such an action could result in severe disciplinary measures, including termination, and potential legal repercussions for the employee and the company. A third incorrect approach is to resign from the company immediately without disclosing the situation. While this avoids direct involvement in a potential conflict, it is not the most professional or responsible course of action. It fails to provide Cleveland-Cliffs with the opportunity to manage the conflict appropriately, and could be seen as an avoidance of responsibility rather than a proactive solution. The company has established procedures for managing such situations, and bypassing them without communication is not conducive to a healthy corporate culture or effective governance. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing potential conflicts of interest should utilize a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to company policy, and ethical conduct. This framework typically involves 1. Identifying the potential conflict, recognizing when personal interests could influence professional judgment. 2. Consulting relevant policies, reviewing the company's code of conduct, conflict of interest policy, and any applicable regulatory guidelines. 3. Seeking guidance, proactively discussing the situation with a supervisor, HR, or the compliance department. 4. Implementing mitigation strategies, following the company's guidance, which may include disclosure, recusal from decision-making, or divestment of the conflicting interest. 5. Documenting the process, keeping records of discussions and actions taken. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are made in the best interest of the organization and in compliance with all applicable laws and ethical standards. Question 15. The assessment process reveals that a candidate you know personally, a friend, is being evaluated for a position at Cleveland Cliffs. You have been involved in the development of the assessment criteria for this role. How should you proceed to ensure adherence to the Cleveland Cliffs hiring assessment tests, regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines? Option A. Advise your friend on how to best answer assessment questions to align with what you believe Cleveland Cliffs is looking for, based on your knowledge of the criteria. Option B. Inform your superiors about your personal connection to the candidate and recuse yourself from any part of the evaluation process that could be influenced by your relationship. Option C. Strictly adhere to the established assessment criteria and evaluate your friend's performance and qualifications objectively, without allowing your personal relationship to influence your judgment or recommendations. Option D. Advocate for your friend's strengths and potential contributions to Cleveland Cliffs, highlighting aspects of their personality and past experiences that align with the company culture, even if they don't perfectly match all assessment criteria. Correct answer is D. Advocate for your friend's strengths and potential contributions to Cleveland Cliffs, highlighting aspects of their personality and past experiences that align with the company culture, even if they don't perfectly match all assessment criteria. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate a situation where personal relationships might influence objective decision-making, potentially leading to conflicts of interest or unfair advantages. Adhering strictly to the Cleveland Cliffs hiring assessment tests, regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines is paramount to maintaining integrity and fairness in the hiring process. The assessment aims to evaluate a candidate's ability to apply these principles consistently. The correct approach involves prioritizing the established hiring criteria and the integrity of the assessment process above personal connections. This aligns with the fundamental ethical principles of fairness, objectivity, and meritocracy, which are implicitly or explicitly embedded in most professional hiring guidelines and regulatory frameworks. By focusing solely on the candidate's qualifications as defined by Cleveland Cliffs assessment criteria, the individual upholds the company's commitment to a transparent and equitable hiring process, preventing any perception of favoritism or bias. This approach directly supports the goal of identifying the most suitable candidate based on objective standards, as intended by the assessment. An incorrect approach that involves advocating for the friend without regard for the assessment criteria fails to uphold the principles of fairness and objectivity. This could be seen as a breach of professional conduct, potentially violating internal company policies or ethical guidelines that mandate impartial evaluation. Such an action could lead to the hiring of a less qualified candidate, undermining the effectiveness of the assessment and potentially harming Cleveland Cliffs' operational efficiency and reputation. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore the friend's application entirely due to the relationship, is also problematic. While it avoids overt favoritism, it also fails to engage with the assessment process in a structured and fair manner. It suggests an inability to manage personal relationships professionally within a work context and misses an opportunity to evaluate the candidate objectively. This approach does not demonstrate a commitment to the established assessment procedures and may be perceived as an avoidance of responsibility rather than a principled decision. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the relevant company policies, ethical codes, and assessment guidelines. When faced with a potential conflict of interest or a situation involving personal relationships, The professional should first identify the core principles that govern the decision e.g., fairness, objectivity, merit. They should then evaluate each potential course of action against these principles and the specific requirements of the assessment. If a personal relationship could compromise objectivity, the professional should recuse themselves from the evaluation or ensure that the evaluation is conducted strictly according to established, objective criteria, with no deviation based on the relationship. Transparency about potential conflicts, where appropriate and according to policy, is also a key component of sound professional judgment. Question 16. Regulatory review indicates that, as a procurement manager at Cleveland-Cliffs, you are responsible for evaluating bids from several vendors for a critical supply contract. You discover that one of the leading vendors is owned by a close personal friend. This friend has not discussed the bid with you, nor have you discussed it with them, but you are aware of their company's strong proposal. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with Cleveland-Cliffs ethical standards and relevant U.S. regulatory frameworks? Option A. Immediately disclose your personal relationship with the vendor's owner to your supervisor and the compliance department, and recuse yourself from any further involvement in the vendor selection process. Option B. Delegate the entire vendor selection process for this contract to a subordinate without informing them of your personal acquaintance with one of the vendors. Option C. Proceed with evaluating all bids objectively, assuming your personal relationship will not influence your decision, and do not disclose it to anyone. Option D. Discreetly advocate for your friend's company during internal discussions, highlighting their strengths without explicitly mentioning your personal connection. The correct answer is A. Immediately disclose your personal relationship with the vendor's owner to your supervisor and the compliance department, and recuse yourself from any further involvement in the vendor selection process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure compliance with Cleveland-Cliffs internal policies and relevant U.S. securities regulations. The core of the challenge lies in maintaining objectivity and avoiding the appearance of impropriety when making decisions that could benefit a personal acquaintance. Careful judgment is required to uphold ethical standards and regulatory obligations. The correct approach involves a transparent and proactive disclosure of the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate internal authority at Cleveland-Cliffs. This demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance by acknowledging the personal relationship and seeking guidance on how to proceed. By recapping what the correct approach involves, it means identifying the conflict, documenting it, and abstaining from direct involvement in the decision-making process related to the vendor selection, while allowing for an objective review by others. This aligns with U.S. securities regulations that emphasize disclosure and the prevention of insider trading or preferential treatment, as well as general ethical principles of fairness and integrity in business dealings. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the vendor selection without disclosing the personal relationship. This failure constitutes a significant ethical breach and a potential violation of Cleveland-Cliffs' internal conflict of interest policy. It creates an appearance of favoritism, undermining the integrity of the procurement process. Furthermore, it could be construed as a violation of U.S. securities laws if the preferential treatment leads to any financial impropriety or misrepresentation. Another incorrect approach would be to subtly steer the decision towards the acquaintance's company without explicit disclosure. This is ethically unsound as it still involves a lack of transparency and a manipulation of the process, even if not overtly stated. It violates the principle of fair competition and could lead to a suboptimal business decision for Cleveland-Cliffs, potentially resulting in financial harm. A third incorrect approach would be to delegate the decision to a subordinate without informing them of the personal connection. This is also problematic, as it fails to address the conflict at the appropriate level and could lead to the subordinate making a decision under undue influence or without full awareness of the potential implications. It shifts responsibility without resolving the underlying ethical and regulatory concerns. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear framework. 1. Identify potential conflicts of interest. Recognize any personal relationships or financial interests that could influence professional judgment. 2. Consult internal policies and external regulations. Understand the specific rules and guidelines governing such situations within Cleveland-Cliffs and relevant U.S. laws. 3. Disclose proactively and transparently. Inform the appropriate parties within the organization about the conflict. 4. Seek guidance and recuse if necessary. Follow the established procedures for managing conflicts, which may include abstaining from decision-making. 5. Document all actions. Maintain records of disclosures, discussions, and decisions made. Question 17. Consider a scenario where a Cleveland Cliffs procurement manager is evaluating a significant contract proposal from a new vendor. The manager discovers that the vendor's principal is a close personal friend from college. The manager believes this vendor offers competitive pricing and quality, but is concerned about the appearance of favoritism. What is the most appropriate course of action for the procurement manager to ensure the integrity of the decision-making process at Cleveland Cliffs? Option A. Proceed with the contract if the vendor's pricing and quality are superior, assuming personal friendship will not influence the objective evaluation. Option B. Award the contract based on the vendor's reputation and the manager's personal assurance of impartiality, without further formal assessment or disclosure. Option C. Delegate the entire contract evaluation and decision-making process to a junior team member to avoid any personal involvement or perception of conflict. Option D. Conduct a thorough impact assessment of the vendor's proposal, documenting all relevant factors, and formally disclose the personal relationship to their supervisor before proceeding with any decision. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough impact assessment of the vendor's proposal, documenting all relevant factors, and formally disclose the personal relationship to their supervisor before proceeding with any decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at Cleveland Cliffs to navigate a situation where a potential conflict of interest could arise. The core of the challenge lies in ensuring that business decisions are made impartially and in the best interest of Cleveland Cliffs, rather than being influenced by personal relationships or potential future benefits. Maintaining public trust and adhering to corporate governance standards are paramount. Careful judgment is required to identify and manage such conflicts proactively and transparently. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough and documented assessment of the potential impact of the proposed contract on Cleveland Cliffs. This includes evaluating the financial implications, operational feasibility, and any potential risks or benefits associated with the vendor. Crucially, it requires identifying and disclosing any personal relationships that could be perceived as influencing the decision-making process. This approach aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and ethical conduct, ensuring that decisions are based on merit and the best interests of the company. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing insider trading and conflicts of interest, would mandate such transparency and due diligence to prevent undue influence and maintain market integrity. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that focuses solely on the vendor's reputation without considering the specific terms of the contract or potential conflicts of interest is insufficient. This fails to address the core requirement of assessing the impact on Cleveland Cliffs and could lead to a suboptimal or even detrimental agreement. It bypasses the necessary due diligence and risk assessment. An approach that involves proceeding with the contract without any formal assessment or disclosure, relying on personal assurance of impartiality, is highly problematic. This disregards established corporate policies and ethical guidelines designed to prevent conflicts of interest. It creates an environment where decisions could be perceived as biased, eroding trust, and potentially violating regulatory requirements related to transparency and accountability. An approach that involves delegating the entire decision-making process to a subordinate without personal oversight or involvement, while claiming to avoid personal conflict, is also flawed. This abdication of responsibility can lead to a lack of accountability and may not ensure that all relevant factors, including potential conflicts, are adequately considered from a strategic perspective. It fails to uphold the duty of care expected of individuals in positions of influence. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Cleveland Cliffs should adopt a systematic approach to evaluating potential contracts. This involves a clear understanding of the company's procurement policies and conflict of interest guidelines. When a potential conflict is identified or suspected, the professional should first disclose the relationship to their supervisor or the designated compliance officer. Following disclosure, a comprehensive impact assessment should be conducted, meticulously documenting all relevant factors, risks, and benefits. This assessment should be objective and focused on the best interests of Cleveland Cliffs. If the assessment indicates a significant risk of bias or a material conflict, recusal from the decision-making process, or seeking an independent review would be appropriate steps. The overarching principle is to prioritize transparency, fairness, and the fiduciary duty owed to the company. Question 18. The assessment process reveals that a candidate for a project management role at Cleveland Cliffs has proposed a new operational process that significantly increases output, but does not explicitly address potential wastewater discharge regulations. Which approach best demonstrates a commitment to responsible operations and regulatory compliance for Cleveland Cliffs? Option A. Suggest a pilot program for the new process, with a plan to monitor environmental outputs informally and make adjustments as needed based on observed results. Option B. Immediately approve the proposal due to its clear efficiency gains and assume existing permits cover any new discharges. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the proposal to identify all potential environmental impacts, consult relevant environmental regulations and internal policies, and integrate necessary mitigation measures before proceeding. Option D. Recommend the proposal for immediate implementation, focusing on the cost savings and increased productivity, and address environmental concerns only if they arise. The correct answer is B. Immediately approve the proposal due to its clear efficiency gains and assume existing permits cover any new discharges. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario where a candidate for Cleveland Cliffs has demonstrated a strong understanding of operational efficiency, but has overlooked critical environmental compliance aspects during a simulated project proposal. This is professionally challenging because balancing productivity goals with stringent environmental regulations is paramount for a company like Cleveland Cliffs, which operates in an industry with significant environmental impact. Failure to integrate environmental considerations from the outset can lead to substantial fines, reputational damage, and operational disruptions. Careful judgment is required to ensure that proposed solutions are not only economically viable, but also legally compliant and ethically sound. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and mitigating potential environmental risks associated with the proposed project, ensuring all activities align with relevant environmental laws and Cleveland Cliffs' internal sustainability policies. This demonstrates a comprehensive understanding of responsible corporate citizenship and risk management. Specifically, this approach would involve consulting environmental impact assessment guidelines, seeking input from environmental compliance officers, and incorporating mitigation strategies into the project plan. This aligns with the principles of due diligence and responsible business conduct expected of all employees, particularly those in roles that influence operational decisions. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering environmental impact fails to acknowledge the legal and ethical obligations to protect the environment. This could lead to violations of environmental statutes, resulting in penalties and legal action against Cleveland Cliffs. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough environmental review risks overlooking potential long-term environmental consequences, which can be far more costly to rectify than proactive planning. Furthermore, an approach that assumes existing environmental permits are sufficient without verifying their applicability to the new project's specific activities is negligent and could lead to noncompliance. Each of these incorrect approaches demonstrates a lack of foresight and a disregard for the regulatory framework governing environmental protection, which is a critical component of operating a responsible industrial enterprise. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that integrates risk assessment, regulatory compliance, and ethical considerations into every stage of project planning and execution. This involves asking critical questions such as, what are the potential environmental impacts of this proposal? Are there any regulatory requirements we need to meet? And how can we minimize our environmental footprint? This proactive and holistic approach ensures that business objectives are pursued in a manner that is sustainable and legally sound. Question 19. The investigation demonstrates that a significant operational issue has arisen at Cleveland Cliffs facility, potentially impacting future earnings. Management is concerned about the immediate market reaction and is considering how to communicate this information, Which of the following approaches best aligns with U.S. regulatory requirements for publicly traded companies like Cleveland-Cliffs? Option A. Provide a vague statement to the market acknowledging an operational challenge, without specifying the nature or potential financial implications. Option B. Immediately issue a press release detailing the issue and its potential financial impact, without further internal review or consultation. Option C. Delay any public announcement indefinitely until the issue is fully resolved, hoping it will not significantly affect quarterly results. Option D. Conduct a thorough, objective investigation to ascertain all facts and potential consequences, consult with legal and compliance departments, and then prepare a disclosure in accordance with SEC regulations and company policy. The correct answer is B. Immediately issue a press release detailing the issue and its potential financial impact, without further internal review or consultation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Cleveland-Cliffs, as a publicly traded company, operates under strict regulatory oversight, particularly concerning financial reporting and disclosure. Pressure to meet market expectations and the potential for significant financial implications necessitate a rigorous and ethical approach to any investigation. Careful judgment is required to balance the need for timely information with the imperative of accuracy and compliance. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective, and documented investigation that adheres strictly to internal policies and relevant U.S. securities laws and regulations, such as those enforced by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. This includes gathering all relevant facts, consulting with legal counsel and compliance officers, and ensuring that any disclosures are accurate, complete, and made in accordance with established reporting timelines and procedures. This approach upholds the principles of transparency, accountability, and investor protection, which are fundamental to maintaining market integrity and stakeholder trust. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate public announcement without a complete factual basis risks misleading investors and violating SEC disclosure rules. This could lead to significant penalties, reputational damage, and legal liabilities for Cleveland-Cliffs. Another incorrect approach that involves selectively disclosing information or downplaying the severity of the findings would constitute a breach of ethical duties and potentially violate anti-fraud provisions of securities laws. Furthermore, an approach that bypasses internal compliance procedures or legal review undermines the company's control environment and exposes it to greater regulatory scrutiny and risk. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a structured decision-making framework. This involves 1. Identifying the core issue and its potential impact. 2. Consulting relevant internal policies, procedures, and legal/compliance experts. 3. Gathering and verifying all pertinent facts objectively. 4. Assessing the situation against applicable U.S. regulatory requirements and ethical standards. 5. Developing a course of action that prioritizes accuracy, transparency, and compliance. 6. Documenting all steps taken and decisions made throughout the process. Question 20. The analysis reveals that a significant operational disruption has occurred at a key Cleveland-Cliffs facility, potentially impacting production levels and future revenue forecasts. Which approach best aligns with Cleveland-Cliffs' regulatory obligations and professional responsibilities in managing this situation? Option A. Prioritize immediate operational recovery efforts and defer any formal assessment or external communication until the facility is fully restored to normal operations. Option B. Immediately initiate a comprehensive impact assessment involving relevant internal departments and legal counsel to determine the scope of the disruption and its potential financial and operational consequences before any external communication is made. Option C. Focus solely on internal operational adjustments and assume that the market will naturally account for any unforeseen production shortfalls without explicit disclosure. Option D. Issue a preliminary public statement acknowledging an operational issue without detailing its potential impact, pending further internal investigation. The correct answer is B. Immediately initiate a comprehensive impact assessment involving relevant internal departments and legal counsel to determine the scope of the disruption and its potential financial and operational consequences before any external communication is made. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Cleveland-Cliffs, as a publicly traded company, operates under stringent regulatory oversight, particularly concerning its financial reporting and disclosure obligations. The need to assess the impact of a significant operational disruption requires a careful and accurate evaluation that aligns with these regulatory requirements. The challenge lies in balancing the urgency of internal decision-making with the imperative of timely and transparent external communication, adhering strictly to the established legal and ethical frameworks governing public companies. The correct approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that prioritizes regulatory compliance and stakeholder communication. This approach is right because it acknowledges the potential for the operational disruption to materially affect Cleveland-Cliffs' financial performance and operational status. By conducting a thorough assessment, the company can accurately determine the scope and severity of the impact, which is a prerequisite for fulfilling its disclosure obligations under relevant securities laws and stock exchange rules. This proactive and diligent evaluation ensures that any public statements or filings made by Cleveland-Cliffs are truthful, complete, and not misleading, thereby protecting investors and maintaining market integrity. This aligns with the core principles of corporate governance and financial transparency mandated by regulatory bodies. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate operational recovery, without a parallel assessment of disclosure implications, would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from neglecting the legal and ethical duty to inform the market about events that could influence investment decisions. Such an oversight could lead to violations of securities regulations, resulting in penalties, reputational damage, and potential litigation. Another incorrect approach that involves making premature public statements based on incomplete information is also professionally unacceptable. This haste bypasses the necessary due diligence required to ensure accuracy and completeness in disclosures. The regulatory framework mandates that all public statements be substantiated and reflect a thorough understanding of the situation, preventing the dissemination of potentially misleading information that could harm investors. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach that integrates operational response with regulatory compliance. This includes 1. Immediate internal assessment of the event's potential impact. 2. Consultation with legal and compliance teams to understand disclosure obligations. 3. Conducting a thorough and objective impact assessment, considering financial, operational, and strategic implications. 4. Developing clear and accurate communication strategies that adhere to regulatory timelines and content requirements. And 5. Continuous monitoring and updating of information as the situation evolves. This framework ensures that Cleveland-Cliffs acts responsibly and ethically in all aspects of its operations and communications.